All right. Well, we're going to start the final lap, so to speak, on our Arab-Israeli conflict discussion. Again, I can't say this enough. Arab-Israel conflict is a misnomer. It is not. It's just the best way we know how to do it. You could say Middle East, Holy Land, but there's so much more than that. I think if you've been to the studies over the time that we've talked about this, you should have an understanding now that it's much more than this little pocket of land that the conflict is over. And we're going to try to make some of the connections on the Islamic side of things to why they're as angry as they are, or conflicting with the Jews, and not just the Jews but the Christians, for all of these reasons. So I want to talk a little bit. We made a leap. We're going to make a big leap on the timeline. When we left, where were we? We're talking about the Philistines and the Canaanites and what the connection is. And the reason why I really wanted to show you that video last week about the Philistines is that there is a bit of a misunderstanding about the Philistines being Palestinian, okay? So if you watched that video last week, if you haven't watched any of them, or you haven't kind of caught up or want to refresh, we've been trying to put all of these up on the Martinsville Church of Christ YouTube channel, so you can go find those, rewatch them again. So you can go find those anytime you want and kind of refresh, like, hey, I remember we talked about this. You can go back and find it. So you can join all 13 subscribers on the Martinsville Church of Christ YouTube channel. Anyway, so go back and look at that video and understand that the Canaanites, the Philistines, as we looked at that, the Canaanites were, if anybody, this is hard to say, if anybody really had any kind of claim to at least the land around Gaza, the Canaanite people would probably be the closest of those people. But the problem with that is, if we go all the way back to our sons of Noah, what do we know about the Canaanites? They are cursed, right? As a result of the sin of Ham, his father. So the area they land in Gaza is kind of amazing, because if you look in that land, in that whole area, there is one really, or at least has been, maybe not so much today, desirable area, and a very fought over area because of its strategic, its trade, and its kind of beauty, really. That area of Gaza, and we say Gaza, there's just an entire strip with us right along the Mediterranean there. That has been very vital for trade. And if it's vital for trade, what are you going to do about it? You're going to fight over it, right? And if you're going to fight over it, you're going to fight over it for a reason, for resources as well. The resources that are in that land were definitely able to be fought over. Go ahead.
So, I guess boiling it down to the basics, is this a land conflict or is this an ideology conflict?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's kind of what
The question was, is this a land conflict or an ideology conflict? And the answer to that is yes. Our ideology, what the claim has always been is our ideology gives us claim. Okay? And going back to the genealogy for some,
Right.
they will use the genealogy to say, well, our ideology, as a result of our genealogy, in other words, we are monotheists, we believe in God, or we believe in Allah, or we believe in some, and therefore, that ties us back to that land and to that place and that time, and our ideology therefore gives us claim. And not only does it give us claim to this, it gives us claim to all of it. Do you see what happens?
Yeah.
Not only is it, do we make a claim on, let's say, for instance, Bar Run Farm down in Salem Township in Highland County, okay? You can lay claim to that. Well, if I can lay claim to it, and I'm this type of person, and I'm this type of person, my ideology says I pretty much just should have it all. I should just get all of Salem Township. I mean, I can take my roots all the way back to John C. Ferris, who platted out Salem Township, and some of the folks that were there in Salem Township to begin with. And I'm a good guy, right? So why don't I just get all of it? I got claim to it. You see the problem? The problem is I have no claim to that. I really don't. But if you bring it all down to it, and somebody says, well, who can lay claim to it? I can put my hand up. I can put my name in that mix, right? That's family heritage, lineage. But then what's going to happen is there may be some person who is 42 generations removed from a tribe of the Shawnee or the Hopewell that used to run through there, and it can go back, well, there's an Indian burial ground over on your property, mine. Okay, so it's the who's first kind of thing, and then the ideology overcomes who can really claim. So the Canaanites might have the easiest land claim to it, but if you try to make the claim that the Muslims or any other group, as a result of that, can lay claim to Canaan, they can't do it through the Canaanites for several reasons. The Canaanites weren't connected to Ishmael. They weren't connected to Abraham. So you have to make a choice. If you're going to make it based on your ideology through Islam, you have to make it through Abraham. If you make it through Abraham, the only way you can do it through Abraham is to say Abraham was promised the promised land by God. Well, if he's not my God, what do I care, right? If I don't worship Elohim, if I don't worship God, well, why do I care whether you lay claim to this land or not? So therefore, you and I are going to fight over it, okay? So there's this big, complicated mess of ideology and land claim over all of this that says, this is why I should own this land, and this is why we should be in charge. That's the other part, is who's in power. So the Canaan land, as we'll call it, the Gaza, all the way up through there, has all these significant things. You notice we haven't even got to Jerusalem yet, okay? Jerusalem has more of a military significance and then turns into a holy significance, because why is it all of a sudden a holy significance? Well, because the ideology lays claim that it's a holy place, okay? Therefore now we can lay claim to it as holy, because Jerusalem and around the area is really not got all that pretty of places to be. It's not, I mean, it's hard to get to, to get from the Jordan to Gaza, you got to go up and over the mountains in this rugged territory. You got Jericho and all the way up through there. It's not an easy route. And if you can't use it as a trade route, because then you got to get up on the mountain and follow all these ridges and hills and mountains and everything to get out into the Jordan Valley so you can trade. And so Jerusalem doesn't make a whole lot of sense to fight over. But the reason why they fight over it, number one, they claim these holy events that happen there. And where does Abraham camp and have a connection to a guy by the name of Melchizedek, who is king of Jerusalem, which means the city or the place of peace. So Jerusalem is already established. Melchizedek is the high priest there. Abraham and Melchizedek make this connection, and then all of a sudden, we've got a claim to it as a result of the connection between Melchizedek and Abraham.
And he just allows this to happen.
Who?
Melchizedek.
Melchizedek was fine with it. He liked Abraham. He and Abraham were good friends.
Did he understand that he really owned all of it by God?
Melchizedek did. And I think that's why Melchizedek comes to the belief in God and is that high priest. So the belief in God, in the one God, the monotheistic God, Elohim, is probably there before Abraham gets there. And so that's why Melchizedek, which is why also we can say of Jerusalem that it was probably already a God-believing or God-fearing city anyway. And they're just Abraham and Melchizedek kind of make a covenant, a plan with each other that this is part of God's land. So
where did the people of Jerusalem come from?
yes. Yes, they did. where, I know where they didn't come from,
Okay.
okay? I can tell you where they didn't come from, and that would be all the lands of the tribe of Ham. Yes. Alright. Everybody completely muddily clear on all of that?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Probably because I'm in this class.
Now, here's the assumption. We've sat in this class for weeks now, for some of you it feels like years, and we have discussed genealogies and land and ideology and all this stuff, and we're sitting here trying to understand all this stuff, and I'm still trying to understand it all. If we were to walk out the street and ask someone to summarize the Arab-Israeli conflict, what do you think we're going to get?
Two people hate each other.
Yeah. Or you're going to get some, I don't say the right word, some bigoted comment in regards to another group of people that's completely ignorant.
Jews
Right.
and Arabs fighting it
Yeah,
out.
Jews and Arabs fighting it out, and you know, and again, that ignorant, bigoted comment, and I'm not going to say bigoted as a result. I'm supporting one. It's going to be bigoted because bigoted has this bias. That's bigoted. It has a bias. Okay, and it's out of ignorance. If I were to go to, this is the crazy part. Now, if I were to go to, let's say, Istanbul. Okay. At one point in time, a very Christian-based, it was the Eastern Empire of the Roman Empire, a Catholic Christian empire, and it's also been Byzantine, it's also been, you know, all of these other empires that have been through there. And if I were to go there and I would say, tell me about the Arab-Israeli conflict, what are you going to hear? Roughly the same thing, right? An ignorant, bigoted comment in regards to two groups of people fighting each other without half the information, okay? And that's really the majority of the concept that this keeps going and gets perpetuated because there's a sheer ignorance over this. And when I say ignorance, ignorance literally means uninformed. It's without the information, okay? It's not stupid. Stupid is I know the information and then I do a dumb thing, okay? Ignorant is I don't know the information, but I'm speaking as if I do, okay? All right. So we're in this part where we have to start talking about the Islamic narrative, the accounts and the claims to Islam, and their connection or their attempt to claim the connection to the Holy Land, as we call it, and to everything else, and why they feel like that is the thing, whether it be through genealogy or ideology. So Islam and its response to the conflict. Now there are a couple short videos in here. I hope it's better than last week when we showed videos. I got to tell you, after sunrise last week, it was so funny. Sunrise, breakfast, and I put on this one video, and the lights went down a little bit. Trevor helped me out with the lights, turned the lights out, and I looked up and I saw this. Just eyebrows up in the air, like, come on, man, I can hold it together, you know? And it did not change when we got into Easter service either. Yeah. So anyway, I do have a couple 8-minute videos that, again, for me to summarize it, I want to give you a perspective from, there's a young lady who narrates from the Islamic perspective in less than 10. She says, can I do it in 10 minutes? Sure. And she makes it sound cute and fun, and you're just going to be like, what? Okay? And you're going to kind of shake your head. And then I'm going to play another video from a gentleman by the name of Dr. J. Smith. And I really would encourage you to go to a YouTube channel, and you can just put in Dr. J. Smith in YouTube, and you are going to be amazed at the information he brings out. And he does this interview with this other individual that they connect a lot. It's I think his name is Fa'ad, and he and Fa'ad talk for hours. And I have to tell you, I feel sorry for my wife. Every once in a while, she'll text me at 1 o'clock in the morning and say, are you coming to bed? And I'm in like hour 6 of watching this stuff, and I'm soaking it all in. Yeah, I know. No.
You feel sorry for your wife sometimes.
Yeah. But this is just an 8-minute clip of some of this stuff. And I want to just say, all I'm gonna do is debunk Islam. That's not my entire point. It doesn't take me that long to debunk it, so I don't need to take a lot of time to do it. But I want to give you an idea as to why they feel, or why they're making the connection to all of this, okay? All right, so let's go to this video. Go ahead and kill it. And this is really funny. You look at the name of the title, TrueTube, right? TrueTube. All right, let's see if I can get this going here. Oh, well, apparently. All right, let's escape that, because I've got the videos queued up. It's okay. Yes, here we go. You ready? Just in case the slide didn't work, I was ready.
How Islam began in under 10 minutes. Not a problem. We've started. Okay, so travel back in time with me to a land far, far away and long, long ago. Mecca and Arabia, about the year 570. Mecca is important for two reasons. One, the Kaaba is there, an ancient temple built to worship God. And two, Muhammad, peace be upon him, was born in Mecca. Now, problem. I can't show you Muhammad, because it wouldn't be right. I'll tell you why in a bit. But in the meantime, here's his name in Arabic. Nice. Back in the day, Mecca was a lawless place. The only way to be safe was to have backup. Lots of rich big brothers who'd beat up anyone who got in your way. So the place was ruled by the most powerful families who could do pretty much what they wanted. And religion didn't help. By this time, the Kaaba had been filled to overflowing with 360 idols that did nothing to help anyone. So it was a tough place to grow up if, like Muhammad, you were a poor orphan and believed in just one God you couldn't see, like the Jews and the Christians. He called him Allah, the God, in Arabic there. Muhammad's dad died before he was even born, and his mum died when he was just 6. So he was brought up by his grandfather, Abdul Muttalib, and then, when he died too, by his uncle, Abu Talib, who had the respect of the city's ruling families, so Muhammad was safe for the time being. Muhammad started out as a shepherd and then became a businessman, traveling about buying and selling stuff for rich clients. When he did some work for a rich widow called Khadija, she was so impressed by his honesty and skill that they ended up getting married, and for a while, it looked like Muhammad was going places. Well, he was, but not how you think. Every year in the month of Ramadan, different calendar, different names for the months,
Right now.
there was a big party around the Kaaba when people made sacrifices to the idols. Muhammad hated it, so he'd get out of town and sleep in a cave he'd found on top of a nearby mountain. One night, Muhammad's praying to Allah when wham! There's the angel Jibreel, you might say Gabriel, standing right in front of him. Read, says the angel, but Muhammad couldn't read. No schools, you see. Jibreel keeps on at him. 3 times he says, read. Then he grabs hold of Muhammad and wham! Again, it's like Muhammad's learned the words off by heart. So he recites the message out loud. Read in the name of your Lord, who created man from a drop of blood. Read, for your Lord is most generous. He who taught by the pen, taught man what he did not know. It was a message from Allah. God was speaking to him just like he'd spoken to the prophets in the Jewish and Christian holy books, which meant he was a prophet too. The messages continued for the rest of Muhammad's life. Allah gave him the words to say and the prophet recited them. The words were written down by his friends, and years later they were collected together and became the Muslim holy book, the Quran, which means recitation, because Muhammad recited it, you see? Anyway, that was much later, so back to the night of power. Muhammad tells his family, then his friends, and eventually everyone about Allah, that he's the one and only God, that he wants everyone to be treated fairly, and long story short, it didn't go down well with the ruling families of Mecca, who liked things just the way they were, thank you very much. You see, Islam means obedience to Allah, and Muslim means someone who obeys Allah, and the ruling families didn't want anyone obeying anyone else but them. So the people who believed in Muhammad's message, the Muslims, were given a hard time. Some were even tortured and killed. A few of them managed to escape to Abyssinia, Ethiopia, but most were stuck in Mecca. Muhammad also had to cope with the death of his wife, and then just a few weeks later, his uncle too. Feeling very down, he went to the Kaaba to pray to Allah one night. Then, the weirdest thing happened. Jibreel turns up, sits him on a winged horse called Al-Buraq and flies him all the way from Mecca to Jerusalem. He prays with all the prophets who've ever lived. Then he's taken up to the heavens to chat with some of the prophets, and then into paradise itself, where Allah tells Muhammad to pray 5 times a day and to stay strong. He's returned to Jerusalem and then flies back to the Kaaba in Mecca. We call it the night journey, and Muslims still argue whether it was a real experience or a vision, but whatever, it gave Muhammad a much needed boost, and just as well, because there were more tough times ahead. So, there was this other city called Yathrib. The people there heard about Muhammad and his message and invited him and his followers to join them. A few at a time, the Muslims left Mecca and made a dangerous journey across the desert to Yathrib. It's known as a hijra, which means migration, like birds do. Muhammad and a few of his friends stayed in Mecca until everyone had got away and then made plans for their own escape. But the ruling families wanted to kill Muhammad while they still could, so 7 sons, one from each family, was sent in the middle of the night to stab the Prophet while he slept. But he was way ahead of them, and when they burst into the house, Muhammad was gone. Trackers were sent out to hunt him down. Muhammad and his best friend Abu Bakr took a roundabout route to try and shake off the pursuit, but the trackers were too good and slowly gained on them. So Muhammad and Abu Bakr hid in a cave and prayed that no one found them. The trackers found the cave all right, but they didn't bother going in to search. There was no way Muhammad could be inside, they thought. There was a spider's web over the mouth of the cave and a nesting bird at the entrance. He must have given them the slip. So off they went, leaving Muhammad and Abu Bakr protected by a spider and a bird. Muhammad made it safely to Yathrib, which was renamed Medina al-Nabi, the city of the Prophet, but most people just call it Medina. But Muhammad's worries weren't over yet. There were 3 big battles between the Muslims and the Meccans. First, the Battle of Badr, when Muhammad and just 313 men faced 1,000 Meccan soldiers. Miraculously, the Muslims won. Then there was the Battle of Uhud, which didn't go so well. Some of Muhammad's men disobeyed his orders and ran off during the battle to raid the Meccans' camp, and so the Muslims were outmaneuvered. Then there was the Battle of the Trench. Medina was protected on 3 sides by mountains, so when the Meccan forces advanced in the city, the Muslims just dug a deep trench. The Meccans made camp, but the weather was terrible. Pouring rain put out their fires and howling winds blew down.
In the Arabian desert, by the way.
Eventually they gave up and went back to Mecca. It was all a bit embarrassing. They were losing the respect of the local tribes who were flocking to join the Muslims. So a peace treaty was signed at Hudaybiyah, but it wasn't long before the Meccans broke it. Muhammad decided that enough was enough. By now he had over 10,000 men, so he led them across the desert to Mecca. The ruling families realized they'd made a huge mistake, but it was too late. All they could do was surrender and hope that the Muslim army killed them quickly. But Muhammad said there should be no more fighting. He rode into Mecca and went straight to the Kaaba. He circled it 7 times anti-clockwise and smashed all the idols, rededicating the Kaaba to Allah. And that's why I'm not going to show you Muhammad. The Muslims wanted to make it totally clear that they only worship the one unseen God. So they didn't have any pictures of Muhammad in case anyone thought he was an idol, and they didn't have any pictures of Allah because he's like nothing on earth, so it would be impossible to draw him anyway. So there you go, how Islam began in under 10 minutes. How did I do?
I just gotta say, Troy, if that's a movie, I'm gonna pay to watch it. Because it's on the thing of orcs and the Middle Earth and
We're Lawrence of Arabia.
Lord of the Rings.
Okay. Again, I'm not gonna spend a bunch of time debunking all of this stuff, alright? I saw the looks on your faces as she's doing this cute little interpretation of Islam.
I like the winged horse trip.
The winged horse, we're gonna talk about that here in just a minute. That's vital to that's one of the reasons why I picked this video.
how much of that was historically true?
None
0.
of it.
Okay, so there was, the battles weren't,
There were some battles,
okay.
yeah. There's a little bit of a problem with the whole Medina, the Battle of the Trench, and
Okay.
there's a little issue with when they ride back into Mecca and they're like, oh no, please don't kill us, and we'll surrender, please, we'll just kill us quickly, but we don't want anything bad to happen to you. Muhammad tells us, no, God loves you all and wants to know. No,
Lord.
Muhammad was not a sweet man by any stretch, okay? To gain those 10,000 men, a lot of bad stuff happened to gain those 10,000 men. They weren't all just volunteers, okay?
The fact that he gained 10,000 men kind of spoke something about his doing like so.
Now, obviously, he was motivational in a way. I mean, he's, you know, so to speak. But there's a lot of historical issues with what is happening here. And the majority of what you're reading or what you're hearing from this young lady is based on Quranic writings, okay? And these are recounts, and some of the later recounts are in the 700s and 900s of these events. So there's chronicles. In other words, there are retellings of the events of Muhammad, the life of Muhammad. Quran is the recitation, so it's supposed to be the writing down of the thing that he spoke from the cave. Okay? Now, nobody was in the cave with him, and that's even to their account. There's nobody in the cave. He's illiterate. He can't write it down. He can't read anything. He was illiterate till the day he died. So there are no writings from Muhammad. So when you ask a Muslim who wrote the Quran, their answer is always Allah. Allah wrote it. It's the words of God. Well, who wrote it down? Who put it to pen? They won't tell you. They're the words of God. Okay? That they're in, you know, we can say, because their claim against the Bible is, well, the Bible was written by man. And if you say, but they're the words of God, the man just penned it down so we can read it. Who penned the Quran? They were the words of God. But who penned it down so you could read it? The words of God. Yeah. And so whenever there's any of those situations, you're exactly right, Dale. They just call it a miracle. Okay? It was just miraculous. It was an act of God. It's the word of God. That's it. Shut up. Don't ask any more questions.
God penned the 10 Commandments on stone.
There you go. And so, but if you say, okay, you ask questions about biblical accounts and they want to connect back to Abraham or somebody like that, they'll say, Bible says. You say, yeah, but man wrote that. Why are you going to believe that?
So
Right?
Muhammad has just claimed that he was a prophet. All of a sudden,
Yeah,
from nowhere, all of a sudden, he had this.
yeah, he was mad at the people down in Mecca about something.
Right.
He was a monotheist. He was already believing in God, and all these heathens down there in Mecca, which just happened to just exist about 150 years before he supposedly was born in that area. Okay, historically speaking, Mecca is like less than 200 years old by the time Muhammad shows up. And there's this temple down there that happens to be, lay claim to, that was supposedly built in the time of Abraham by Abraham and Ishmael in 2100 BC. In a town that didn't exist until 400 AD. But he was mad because they were defiling the Kaaba with all the 365 idols or 360 idols or whatever it is. So he gets mad, he goes up and he hides it, he goes in the cave and he pouts, and Gabriel comes and gives him the word of God, and he spouts it off. Nobody's there to hear it. So he goes into town, spouts it off. They're mad because he spouts it off. Nobody knows exactly what he said, but we account to it decades later, and somebody wrote it down, okay? But we can't tell you who. Go ahead.
What's interesting, because, you know, you said when you mentioned the Bible, they say, well, but man wrote that. So
Right.
That's not true.
Yeah.
But yet, the way she started everything was when he went into the cave, Gabriel came.
Yeah.
And where did Gabriel come from? Where do we have accounts of Gabriel?
In the Bible.
In the Bible.
Yeah.
But then it says man was created from a drop of blood.
Drop of blood.
Which
There you
is
go.
like, what?
Yeah.
Where did blood come from?
Yeah. It was a miracle. It was God. God created a miracle. It was a miracle. Just a miracle. Shut up. So the response, if you happen to notice throughout that account, and again, it's an 8-minute clip. You know, if you were to give some human being 8 minutes to describe Christianity and history of all of it, how do you do that? But anyway, but she knows how she does everything cute, fun, right? Just like you Christians and you Jews in the Bible and the accounts. It's like the prophets, just like back in the Bible. And you notice how she was trying to make that, we're just like you. Everything's cool. We're just like you. Everything's fine.
It sounded like a fairy tale book to me.
Yeah, and until you say, okay, but I don't believe in Allah. Okay, that's to you. Fun, huh? All right. Are you with me so far? All right. Now, this is, now that we know kind of what they're saying is the history of Muhammad. We don't have images of Muhammad. Why do we not have images of Muhammad?
An idol.
An idol.
Yeah. You know, you're not to make idols. And he was mad about the idols. So don't make any images of me, who may or may not have ever existed. Now the guys who put ink to paper and write down the recitation, we have pictures of them. Now, every time, you notice when she said Muhammad, almost every time, you'll say, Muhammad, may he be blessed, or some form of that. So you're not even speak the name Muhammad without saying Muhammad, may he be blessed, or, you know, all praise to Allah, things like that. You're not even to speak that name without giving homage to Muhammad. Now, odd, huh?
Kind of sounds like Hail Hitler to me.
Yeah, so we're not to have images because that would be idolatry. But if you speak the man's name, you have to give homage.
Instead of God giving it to him.
But he would have said, all praise to Allah and me. But don't speak my name without. Yeah. So you see some of the conflict there is no images because that would be idolatry, but if you speak his name, you have to give homage to him. And you say Muhammad, you can say may he be blessed or may he be praised. There's two different words of that, okay? Versions of that. This is all interesting, isn't it? Okay, it is to me. Just sit there and listen, smile, make it sound like it's interesting, okay? Now, here's this Dr. J. Smith and Fa'ad. We talk about the Quran. Quran meaning recitation. That's a rough translation as well. Of the statements of Muhammad, which is God's word, right? So Muhammad gives God's word through Gabriel, and then someone eventually, God miraculously, imprints it on paper somewhere. No human did that, okay? So decades later, some person who wasn't there. Now wait a minute, Luke wasn't there either, right? There's, see the arguments? So somebody who was never there starts recounting the recitation. Well, because Muhammad recited it to him again. Okay?
Guy's got an impeccable memory.
Yeah, for an illiterate bandit shepherd boy, he's got really good memory. Anyway, so it was a miracle. Shut up. So anyway, we get to the point where we talk about the Quran. Now, the Quran has its iterations for the next 200 to 300 years after Muhammad dies, and then there are Quranic writings. There are other historical writings, genealogies, other things that come along for the next hundreds of years. And you say, well, how can you do that? Well, yeah. Now, the argument on the Christian side of things is this simple on the Christian side, not the Hebrew side, because Moses is the lawgiver hundreds of years after the law is given, right? So Jesus' account and the account of the Gospels and the New Testament is written from 33 AD to about 92. Okay? And a lot of that is the experience of those living in the Christian life. The Gospel accounts occur within 17 years of Jesus' life. And the only non-eyewitness to that was Luke. Okay?
Who researched all things. to find
Correct.
them.
Correct. So there is an easy defense for the well, you know, Bible was written later on, and then it was canonized. Wait a minute, canonized and written, two different things. The authorized version of Quran comes centuries later. The ones that people are using, there are hundreds of different iterations of the Quran. Okay, now, and again, so they're going to say, yeah, well, what about all Bible translations, right? Yes, we get that, but it's nothing added. Quran has been added and subtracted to on multiple occasions. Like, when I say multiple, I mean hundreds of times. And omitting histories and genealogies and things like that. For example, one of those iterations, as we've talked about, and never mind, we'll get to that in a second. Okay. Listen to Dr. J. Good stuff. 8 minutes.
Looked at historical sources outside of Islam and found something very interesting. There is no mention of a holy book used by the followers of Muhammad before 719 AD. Let's take a look at this. Dr. J, welcome back.
Yeah, and we do need to give lip service to Robert Harlan. We need to thank him for all the great work he has done. He has been quoted right, left, and center for obvious reasons, because he does what the Muslims should have done. And that is, since you don't have anything, you admit you don't have anything for the first 2 centuries. For 200 years, you have nothing. If you have nothing, then why don't you go and find out what is there? And there's a reason why you have nothing, because the Abbasids have destroyed it all. So why don't you go to those things that the Abbasids didn't have control over? Why don't you go to those who were there in situ, who are actually being impacted by these Muslims, like John of Damascus, like Al-Kindi, like Abraham from Tiberias? These are the guys who are living underneath the authority of these Arabs who call themselves Ishmaelites, who later called themselves Muslims. They were being impacted, and they were writing, and their writings don't get destroyed. They're still wholesale, they're still with us today. Why don't you see what they say? And that's what he did. He just went all over for the 7th century. He wasn't used in the 9th and 10th century. He had already, like I have and you have, we've already thrown that out as too late and too far north. And he said, let's see what they're saying. And there's some little tidbits that I just like to introduce that have come up that actually support what we're talking about. One of the things, and Shoemaker mentions this in his book, and that's why Shoemaker gives him a lot of credit. And he refers to this book. He says, in this more than 870-page volume, that was published in 1997, in the last century. Mm-hmm. So it's not new. It's been around for over 20 years. Hoyland catalogs over 130 non-Islamic sources that make reference to the religious movement founded. Now, here's where Shoemaker should have founded by Muhammad. No, nowhere do any of these references say Muhammad.
That is true. I mean, I looked at him. I'm surprised that you would say that. It did talk about a religious person or a leader, but it did not give a name.
And one of my criticisms is what Hoyland does do. He calls them Muslims and he calls Muhammad Muhammad. No, there's no reference in any of these to a man named Muhammad. Now, you are going to see Peter. I forget the name of. There's one reference, not Sabaeus. It's the presbyter, Thomas the Presbyter. Does use the word Muhammad, but it's written in the 9th century. That is obviously in the 9th century.
Yeah, we're talking about early. I mean, later we know why it was used because it's been developed already.
Exactly, and that's why Al-Kindi uses Muhammad, because he's there when Muhammad was well known. He's using the word Muslim because they were Muslims at that time. But anybody writing in the 7th century with documents in the 7th century, they don't use the word Muhammad and they don't use the word Muslim. So Hoyland needs to be careful because he's not quoting it correctly when he's referring to it. Even Shoemaker makes this mistake. Though that name is not used, is what I say. At various stages in its early history, around 60 of these witnesses were written during the first Islamic century. That means from 622 to 719. Now, up to 719, according to Hoyland, there is no reference to the Quran. Let's see the quote. None of these first century witnesses so much as mentions any sort of sacred writing used in any capacity at all by Muhammad's followers. This is nothing short of incredible. This is Shoemaker saying this. This is nothing short of incredible if, as many would suppose, that the Quran was already collected by 650. Everybody would have known about it. Yeah. Especially if it had been standardized in a canonical form and was believed by Muhammad's followers to be direct revelation from their God. This is solid evidence that is deeply problematic for accepting the canonical narrative of a Sunni Noltekian Schwalian paradigm, evidence that has accordingly been widely ignored by Western scholars.
Right, and this is proof, obviously, there was no such thing as a known book That means it was in the process of being developed.
That's right. And then he goes to Hoyland to say, well, what does Hoyland say is the first reference to this Uthmanic recension? And the first reference, the earliest source for the Uthmanic collection, is not till Al-Zuri talks about it. Look at the date, 742. That's the mid-8th century.
That's 100 years after the alleged reign of Uthman.
Exactly. It is exactly 100 years after the reigns of Uthman.
Yeah.
Well, Uthman starts in 644, so just 2 years early, shy of that. But can you see, this is not, why has no one brought this up? And then here it says, he goes back and this, he then quotes Nikolai Sinai. Yet both the letter of Leo III and John of Damascus are just as old, if not older, as the alternative account of the Quran's origin and related by Said ibn Muhammad, neither of which describe any Uthmanic codex. So these are things we need to look at. These are things we need to hear. And I'm thankful that Shoemaker is bringing these up and saying these are important because these are nuggets that give us a timeline. He continues on and he talks about the 7th century Jew or Christian knew nothing about this Quran, this book. And this is what Shoemaker says. It is worth emphasizing that according to, in the strongest terms, that according to Hoyland, that prior to John of Damascus and the letter of Leo III, those are both 8th century, which appear to be roughly contemporary works from the 8th century, no writer, Christian or otherwise, shows any awareness at all that Muhammad's followers had his sacred book of their own. In fact, they don't even show that there's Muhammad's followers or Muhammad. This long silence should certainly give us pause, and it raises significant questions about the history and status of the Quran during the first Islamic century. The Jews and Christians of late antiquity were peoples for whom the authority, the sacred book was paramount. Surely they would have been curious and inquisitive to learn whether these newly arrived Abrahamic monotheists had a scripture of their own, and yet they show complete ignorance of any distinctive corpus of scripture claimed by Muhammad's followers until the early 8th century.
And this is powerful, by the way.
Huge, huge. If this is the greatest book in the history of mankind, if this is the book that corrects this book and it supersedes this book, then why did nobody know about it?
And if this is the greatest man ever sent by God to transform the universe, why wouldn't anybody make reference to him?
Yeah. Hoyland continues on and talks about the fact that these early Christian writers dispute the standard Islamic narrative. Leo III, John of Damascus, Abraham, and Al-Kindi, all these sources, all of which are either contemporary or before Al-Bukhari's sources, where we get about the Quran. Remember, it's Al-Bukhari, volume 6, hadith number 509.
204 years later.
Where we get all this material in 100 years later, or in this case, 40 years later. It is clear that the Uthmanic tradition for the creation of the Quran is much later and based only on isnads. Isnads are a list of names of which nothing is written. It's all oral tradition, which are nothing more than, he just goes on and says, nothing more than a list of names, while these 4 sources are written sources predating those of Al-Bukhari. Fascinating, and this is why we need to have Robert Hoyland. Robert Hoyland doesn't really come to any conclusions on it. He just puts out the material there for us to deal with it.
Like any scholar should do.
And he's
right?
saying, we've got to deal with it. We've got to come to conclusions, and that's what we're doing as well.
Exactly. I mean, Robert Hoyland is saying, here's my evidence. Tell me what you make out of it.
Well, we're telling him what we make out of it.
And you have to understand also his position where he's at. He has to be careful as well. So I think Robert Hoyland did an excellent job for all of us just by presenting these evidence.
Yeah, good stuff.
Excellent. So what are we going to talk about next time?
We're then now finally going to get into the Quranic manuscripts.
Wonderful. And I can't wait, of course, because it's a fascinating topic. Until next time, have a blessed day. Thank you for watching this video.
Okay, I'm curious who this guy is.
Al-Fad.
He's obviously Muslim, saying, hey, yeah, this is a bunch of
Yeah.
malarkey.
Uh-huh.
So I'm confused.
Okay. And you see that this guy is in very traditional Muslim garb.
Right.
Okay.
Is it Muslim or is it Arabic?
It is Muslim.
Okay.
The way he has that folded, everything about how he is wearing what he is wearing is Muslim tradition.
Okay.
Okay. Now he is likely what you would call Muslim by heritage, Muslim by birth, not necessarily by faith.
He's an infidel, I can tell.
If this guy walks into Tehran, he's dead. Okay? And he's following as best he is a believer in Allah. If you ask Al-Fa'ad, he's a believer in Allah, okay? As God.
But he's not the believer in the Quran.
And in all of the history of Muhammad and the precepts within the Quran, he would probably subscribe to, but not everything about it. The reason being is what he is finding out informationally about the writings, about the history. We just continue to find all this information that says Muhammad may have never even existed. It's likely that Muhammad was never even a guy. Okay?
So I would think it'd be kind of hard to follow the teachings of somebody that maybe I'm now finding out never even existed.
Correct. And so you're going to get this argument back and forth about historical writings about Jesus. Okay? But what we're looking for, here's the key to this, and Dr. J. Smith will point these things out. He is not, you notice he didn't use Quranic text, he didn't use biblical text. What did he use? Historical, extra or outside of those texts. So if we really want to look at the history of, say, Jesus and Christianity, who are we going to look to? We look to our Bible because we have faith in what the Scripture has to say. Who do we really look to say, yeah, but other
historians?
We have historical text about Jesus.
Correct.
That
Now, think about this. 140 years after Muhammad passes away, and he's got tens of thousands of military men on his side. Now, you see between Mecca and Medina, it's 200 miles. Again, go back to the history of Ishmael and Hagar. They leave up around Jerusalem all the way down to Mecca.
Maybe they got the flying horse.
And through a desert. Who knows? Anyway. You're not that far away, in historically speaking. You would know what's going on in Egypt, and you'd know what's going on in Ethiopia, you'd know what's going on in Assyria. So somebody 450 miles away from Jerusalem to 600 miles away from Jerusalem with tens of thousands of military men, no historical record.
That they even existed?
Correct.
Okay.
Nobody in Jerusalem knew about Muhammad and his men during the time. Nor did they know about it for another 140 years.
This goes back to the ignorance
Correct.
portion, because Islam is one of the faster, if not the fastest growing religion
Correct.
in the world.
Right.
So people are willing to accept.
You're looking at the map, right? You see what I'm talking about? All right, we're going to quickly do this. So that, dang it, no we're not. Because if I get into the genealogy, we're going to get into the genealogy, then we're going to talk about the flying horse and all that other fun stuff, and the spider and the bird and the whole bit. And again, we smile at the flying horse and the bird and the spider. But last week in our sermon, we talked about shutting the lion's mouth and, a talking donkey, and, God does those kinds of things. So, it's easy to kind of dismiss that. The problem we have, and I'll just give you real quick, the problem we have, the night that we talk about is they want Jerusalem. And if you notice, there's no connection to Jerusalem. If you said, hey, we want Gaza or Ashdod or Ashkelon in the Gaza Strip, you might lay claim through the Canaanites or somebody like that. You might lay claim to that. But why Jerusalem? Why Jerusalem? And we've never had any connection to any of these people to Jerusalem until he flies a flying horse from Mecca to Jerusalem overnight, has a vision, and experiences some things in Jerusalem, which makes Jerusalem what? A holy place for Islam. And if it's a holy place, what's next?
War.
We want it. It's ours.
You have to get the unholies out.
Right. Those who are unholy have to be removed or converted.
Throughout all this, I keep going back. This is not a battle against flesh and blood.
No.
This is a battle against powers and principalities and heavenly forces in the dark realms.
There you go. All right. Next week, I've got about I've got about 4.5 years of this left to give to you. We're going to try to do it this next Sunday and maybe the following Sunday to finish up. So hang with me. Gene's on standby, so.
Or sometime in June.
Yeah.
June of which year?
No. Yeah, no, I wouldn't, I would say the who have perpetuated it, probably closer to the line. Again, we're having a hard time figuring out whether we're going to
Even existed, yeah.
Maybe they were really.
Mention of Muhammad till the 1960s when he became a boxer.